welcome to Build and Thrive, the podcast that is dedicated to improving the health and the happiness of the construction industry. I am your host, Jennie Armstrong, and today we are joined by our co-host, Stuart Mace. So, hello, Stuart.
Hello. How are you? Should we shout out to our sponsor?
We can do it. Should we both do it? Yep, you go first.
Well, it's GKR Scaffolding, isn't it?
Yeah,
who makes all things possible on this show.
Yes, so thank you to GKR.
Yay.
Right, so we are recording today because obviously very big news for UK construction is the Construction Leadership Council Joint Code of Practice of Mental Health. So we had our network meeting last week, which is our monthly get-together online, where we bring people that are working in the same space as us, all trying to move the industry forward. And it was a very well-attended session and a very emotive session, I would say, because people had a lot to say and a lot of opinions on it. So we felt it was right that you and I had a conversation on the podcast, just really to share some of that kind of industry feedback and where our heads with it all. So, but let's go back to basics, Stuart. Will you just explain? I'll get you to do it because I'm lead us into it. Will you explain what the JCOP is, please, for those that don't know about it?
I'll try and be succinct with it. I generally find when I do explain it gets longer and longer. It is a code of practice which the CLC have released about a month ago, which is looking at ultimately the root cause of mental illness within the industry. And it's a prevention-led document. It looks at a lot of things, clients and contractors, but really what it's saying here is we have got to start looking at psychosocial risk management as the way forward. And it highlights a lot of things that are wrong with the industry and offers suggestions as to how to look at getting these right. There is a little bit of working out for each individual organisation, but ultimately it's a nice piece of work which, as I've described it, as letting the genie out of the bottle. It is saying what we all know, but it now has a bit of a voice now, and it's now in public view for us to discuss, adhere, or not as we move forward. But for me, a well needed piece of documentation, which is, as I was saying, pointing at a lot of things that we do know and we need to rectify.
And I think it's probably the first document that's publicly came out that really focuses on, right, these are not individual issues, it's not about support, this is look at it. And for us it was obviously aligned so much with what we're trying to do as a business, so it was very welcomely received by ourselves, because it was, I suppose, explaining what we've been trying to do over the last 6 months, years really.
Yeah, it is, and the people who put it together, a lot of it has been supported by the Crown Estate, Heathrow Airport, BAM, a lot of tier ones in there. Are people who are realistically going to be looking for this in bids and tenders and whatnot. So we're hopeful that this, as I said, starts to move the needle along a more evidence-based approach around prevention-led and organisational issues, as opposed to, as you rightly said there, Jenny, the individual blame. Dare I even say, go as far as saying that it's the individual that's the issue. Get the individual well, and everything's going to be okay. We know that's not actually the case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose let's start off by talking about the hazard clusters, because I think I suppose we're going to share some of the conversations that we've been having and the feedback we've been having. I would say, so the 5 hazard clusters, I'll get you just to remind me of all of them when we've got them in a second, but no, I don't think anyone's really pushed back and said they're the wrong priorities for the industry to focus on. What just remind us, Stuart, what are the 5, and just your thoughts on if they're the right things and what's missing and where could we else focus if we need to?
I think that 85, 90% there. It's working patterns. So, you're looking at long hours, shift patterns, long distance travel, working away from home, flexible working. The second one is operational demands, unachievable deadlines. For me, that's probably the biggest single most cluster hazard, should I say. Poor planning and poor communication. The third one is people, factors and environment. As we can understand, that's going to be sort of limited praise and support, poor quality and welfare facilities, and bullying and harassment. Fourth one is financial issues with payment. Looking at job insecurity, again a big issue. Low financial literacy and disputed payments. And the fifth one is support factors. So we're looking at low mental health literacy, low help seeking and stigma. And so, I would say they cover a lot of what we know already in the industry.
Yeah, I think that's what the code has tried to say, is that we're not going to try and solve everything, but we know the most common areas to look at. And I think, whereas there's been some criticism of it, the intention is that it's the first starting point, and let's evolve and grow. But I reckon if every company did those 5 things and started to do something in that area, we would see a huge shift forward in the industry. So
I think you're right. And I think when you say every company, and when we say every company, we're looking at SMEs, one-man bands, as I've referred to in the past, Dave and Sons with 2 vans and workforce of 15 who don't have the resource, the HR, all this sort of stuff, don't adhere or go for ISO standards or anything along those lines. It's the trickle down effect here for me. And again, it's basically saying we're managing physical risk, psychosocial risk, I say the same as physical risk. So how does Dave and Son manage physical risk, if at all? And, I think, we've got to get it right at the top, obviously. And the people who put this together generally are in a minority of the industry, but it doesn't mean to say this doesn't work for the whole of the industry. And I think, as you rightly put there, Jenny, is that if we're starting to look at getting some of this right throughout the industry, we're going to be hopefully in a better place. Yeah,
and we've got, I suppose, the opportunity to reflect on the network meeting last week. There was, as I said, it was probably the most attended session we've had. When we said we wanted to talk about it, there was lots of people that had an opinion.
Yeah.
And then we also presented at one of our clients' supply chain events last week as well. So on the supply chain event, and these are mainly tier 2 contractors, I think there was one person in a room of about 50 that had even heard of the joint code of practice. Yeah. So I think it shows there's a little bit of work to do with the communication side. And it feels like the only people that seem to know a lot about it are those that are probably quite present on LinkedIn, because that's where there's been a bit of comms. But what was your thoughts after those 2 events that we've had and the feedback we've had so far?
Fairly mixed. Positive from the network event, because we ran a few polls and they sort of showed that there's clearly a need for this, and it was positive. It has been positively received on the whole, which is great. The I suppose the negative for me, and we've noticed this, hence the reason why I guess we're doing this podcast and they're still banging the drum for this, is that, as you say, only one or 2 people in out of 50 were aware of this. So it hasn't really been publicised or launched with a big fanfare. I think that might be deliberate, personally.
Maybe, yeah.
I think it's a case of we're going to we've asked people to adhere to this in a year's time. It's version 1. I think there'll be certain various iterations of this. It's kind of like, right, it's out there now, and as when people arrive to it, they'll obviously have to adapt accordingly. So it's a bit of a slow burn, but when people are aware of it, because in that room when we did mention it, a couple of people sort of said that's good, that's what we need. So I haven't really heard anyone really be negative about its intention, the contents, and the direction of travel. But yeah, as I said, you at the beginning of the show sort of said there was a passionate group on our networking group, correct, and genuinely think we all are on the same hymn sheet with regards to which direction we need to move in. So I think that's a positive. The area which I'm a bit concerned about at the moment is if we do what we've always done, Jenny, we're going to get what we've always got.
Yeah.
And there's always been the case of, well, we ran another poll, didn't we, on the networking event, which was if we're going to make this successful, who's responsible for it? Actually, is a word cloud, should I say? And what did come up as the most was clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's a good place to take this conversation. Is really the JCOP does call out clients, if I can put it that way, to say, look, before you even get to putting the spade in the ground, we're banged through. We haven't got it right. But it's how are clients going to perceive this, and how are principal contractors going to perceive this in working with their clients with regards to trying to get it right at that level, so we don't have the downstream problems which the JCOB relates to, further on. I think that's the key issue.
Yeah, and it's going to be my thoughts are there's either going to be people like saying, right, we need to do this, and there's just finger pointing, right, client, you need to do this, no, you need to do that, and exactly the same place we are. And especially with a lot of projects, they're set up, they're structured to go back and make those huge contractual changes about working hours and all this other stuff. Will probably be in the too hard box. I mean, new projects are starting. I think they've got the opportunity to have those conversations. And this is where we're trying to take one of the conversations that with our clients at the moment is, well, let's just have the conversation about what can we do, and not saying, we've got to get everything right, but it's all about risk mitigation. It's not about risk elimination. So we just need to find those things and show action for it. So I'm hoping that you'll get some clients who say, right, let's do that. My worry is that it's still not, that they won't be able to freely say exactly what they want to say because of the challenges that we've always had. If we start negatively saying about the client, they're going to be thinking, right, well, I don't want to give the next piece of work to that contractor. So, yeah.
Yes, yeah, and I think we're looking here around. There's two arguments, Jenny, and I think one argument always wins in this industry, and I think will continue to win if we can prove. The two arguments is the commercial argument and the moral argument. What's the right thing to do? What should we be doing? Because the industry hasn't been doing that.
No.
Okay, we're in the situation we're in because we haven't simply abided by the law. Because if the law states, the Health and Safety at Work Act states that we need to identify risk. It doesn't say physical or mental or psychosocial. It says risks. Yeah. We need to identify risks. We need to identify hazards. Baseline, identify, manage, control, monitor, which way you want to put it. Plan, do, check, act. And of course, we haven't done that because the HSE hasn't enforced it, and therefore the world or the UK have been getting away with it. Is bottom line for me. So therefore, the commercial argument is what we need to be looking at. And it says in the code of practice, but we clearly know this and with Mace Construct coming out with a report a couple of weeks ago about when high turnover or turnover on a project, how much it loses a day or an hour. Whether those figures are to be believed, it doesn't really matter. It's demonstrating there's a huge amount of commercial loss and waste by not doing it right. And the phrase I generally use is happy chickens lay more eggs, right? And there is a lot of research based on that and evidence. And we're going back decades. This isn't just,
it's logical.
And therefore, when we start to look upstream, surely the logical argument, as you mentioned there, is, well, if we get it right downstream, it's going to make more sense. It's going to. So when we start looking at the commercial decision, so client has 4, 5, I don't know how many bids, to a tender. They go with the cheapest and the quickest. And let's say it does or does not adhere to 45,001, 45,003, or the JCOP. And the others do. We're then looking at, so why have you gone with that? Because consciously downstream that's going to cause an issue from a moral argument, but you're probably going to find you're not going to get it done on time. annual budget.
Yeah.
Right, and then you've got to start looking at CDM regs, and construct. Reg 4 is about ensuring that a client is making sure that the principal contractor can do the job in sufficient time. Okay, now sufficient can be a bit ambiguous, but if client A is saying I can do this project in 3 years, and client B, C, D, and E are saying they're going to do it in 3.5 years or 4 years, what is client A? How are they making that number work? So do we get to a situation that if something happens downstream and there are pressure or whatever happens on that project, do we get to a situation where we're looking at why did the client make the decision on this? The other thing I looked at over the weekend, boring that I am, is there are prosecutions in the UK around the regs.
Well, CDM.
Yeah,
there will be,
over 120 a year.
Yeah.
Whereas you look at prosecutions from the HSE around managing stress, 0. Right, so that has a bit more teeth. So you can argue, well, we're going to go with the cheapest and with the quickest. But the genie's out of the bottle here, Jen, I think. We now have a code, whether it's a piece of paper, whether it's worth what it's written on, a principal contractor can waive that and say, no, I'm sorry, but we're not tolerating this. We know this is going to have commercial impact on us downstream, so we're going to deal with this upstream. And again, if we continue to do what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always got, and therefore we need that to change at that level. And I do think there's a commercial and a moral argument for it, and plus the legal piece. And
this is where it comes back to the conversation we had in the network meeting about who needs to be leading this, because what we don't need is, and what I think is going to happen is it's going to be driven very much by health and safety. You can have health and safety leads who are passionate about how they look after people. They're going to be trying to drive action within their business. But what you need is all of the managing directors, the CEOs, the leadership team to say, right, what are we going to do here? This isn't something we've got to push on people. This is something they're going to say, right, you need to help us. And those conversations about, yes, I can't, we're going to do the right thing, we're going to put the program in right. If we don't win that job, then that's okay. But that's going to be a brave person that's going to be able to stand and do that, given the complexities of construction and the way the industry is. There's not endless pots of jobs coming on the market that they can have that luxury to make that choice sometimes. So this comes back to, I think, the point you made about the word cloud and who is responsible. This is where we need leaders of businesses to be responsible for implementing the JCOP. We spoke in the network meeting about the role of health and safety professionals. And that everyone on the call was health and safety background. They're the ones that
occupational health.
Occupational health. They're the ones that really want to see this work and be put in place. But everyone recognises it's not theirs. They can only do so much. They can't make the changes about, do we bid for that job or not, because the programme is going to be too tight. And I think that's where the Construction Leadership Council, I feel, needs to step up and have that leadership piece where this is driven by the business leaders, not another health and safety group. Time will tell. I haven't seen many, apart from the initial launch, I haven't seen much I suppose information, but it's still only a month that it's been released, so I can imagine it might be them all working out in their own areas. What is it that we need to do here?
Yeah, I agree, and it's not legislation; it's a code. So probably a bit of a slow burner. But having said that, and again, I'm going to sort of counter argue that is. This again, I think this, and I've mentioned this before. This will become a commercial decision because of as we know what happens in organisations, and as I said, if your employers are more satisfied and have a lot more purpose in their work, you're going to, ideally the productivity is going to be better and a better performance from that aspect of it. But it's going to. And this thought came to me quite recently, actually, in my last funny enough, Jenny, a conversation I've had just before this recording was with somebody in HR, who was with a HR consultancy, and I'll come on to that in a second if I can. But it's kind of looking at when we look at who's part behind the JCOP and who's the client. So some clients are behind this.
Yeah.
So they're going to be asking you to mark your own. They're going to ask JCOP to be in tenders because they've got to. It's their own work. And when we look at the big clients in the UK, Crown Estate, HS2, Heathrow, etc., highways, and what have you, there's no way they're not going to have this in their tenders.
Yeah.
And I saw a job advertised last week by BAM. They're looking for a health and wellbeing manager. And you look at the responsibilities, and it's got in there, will comply to the JCOP,
really?
to which I copied and pasted and gave them a few hand claps because that's great to see. As well as having somebody educated to a degree or a diploma level, which was good to see. However, the point I guess I'm looking to make here from the commercial piece is that we're going to have, we've seen it, you've got to have 45,003 to really bid for this tender. So clients are already asking for that. There's going to be a move, obviously, with 45,001 with their draft revision, which Kate Field eloquently demonstrated at Safety SHW Live last week with regards to how psychosocial risk is going to be treated exactly the same as physical risk for you to get your 45,001. So that's going to move the needle at that level. I was having a conversation with a chap who's in a HR consultancy dealing with all SMEs, and none of them have 45,001. So there's no reason for them to look at this. However, the conversation was tier 1 and tier 2 will have 45,001, potentially some will have 45,003. They are going to need to demonstrate that the people they're asking to come and do work for them are working to a level. To me, that level is the code of practice. So it's kind of saying we're not making this law, but we're expecting you to at least be able to evidence how you're managing stress, bullying, overwork, poor environments and welfare, and financial issues and what have you. We as a tier 1, tier 2 are compliant to the code of practice. So we've got a 30-day payment in place, which helps you downstream so you can hopefully pay your employees on time or more regularly or whatever it might be. Likewise, can you demonstrate to us what you're doing? So I'm kind of seeing it from that kind of tier: 45,003, 45,001, and JCOP. They all are asking, give or take, the same thing. But I kind of feel that the JCOP will become that you must be able to demonstrate your evidencing to that code to win business at an SME level,
which is kind of one of the things that we've been speaking about, which is how do you demonstrate that you've done the code, which I think this is going to be one of the learnings that comes out over the next year, because I mean, our obvious thought is, right, we'll say do 45,003, then at least you've got, the audit trail of the process and the systems and everything that you do that looks at psychosocial risk management, which I think would appeal obviously to those organisations that have 45,001. But what do they do? What do the tier 2s have to do? And I suppose that's where some of the conversations we've been having over the last couple of weeks with some of our clients around what is that thing. And most are saying, right, let's do a gap analysis. Let's work out where we are and where we're not. And I think that's got to be the starting point for every organisation, but I suppose every project at project level, really, because it's such a variation between each, from one project to another under the same contractor.
But what you're finding, and thanks obviously to you for helping me with this, but the internal auditing course I did for 45,001. So that is basically demonstrating anyone that comes on site is perceived as an employee, or is going to be perceived in that way, as in if this site of this organisation has 45,001. It doesn't matter if you're a subcontractor or not. You need to be treated in, or you need to adhere, and you need to be able to demonstrate. So the supply chain is going to have to understand, certainly when the revision for 45,001 comes into play, it's going to have to understand it has a part to play. It can't not do anything. And where this will elevate 45,003, 45,001 is a certificate you're going to need to have. 45,003 is showing you how to do it, it's telling you how to do it. And if you comply to 45,003, clearly you're going to get your 45,001 from a psychosocial point of view. So that's how they're marrying it up, and that's how they're being wedded. But when you start to look at it's called I think it's SL Annex SL, which is the learning for every single ISO. It's basically, and it comes, for example, if you look at IT, if you look at the ISO 27001, I think it is, which is around security, IT security. You probably know more about it than I do based on some of the work that you do and being a business owner. It doesn't matter who's logging onto your security, into your IT. It doesn't matter if it's an employee or if it's a contractor or what have you. They have to reach a certain level of a standard, and it's the same with all ISOs. So therefore, 45,000. The subbies, the subcontractors, the one-man bands are going to have to at some point work out what they need to sort of demonstrate and evidence for their business so they can get work.
I suppose in my mind I'm thinking like 45,001 health and safety standards. You can have a contractor with 45,001, but you can walk on their jobs and the safety standards are not where they need to be, and you just hope that this doesn't just end up being a bit of a tick box exercise, that an auditor comes on and you can present the right information.
They're
obviously doing a great job because they can produce a nice little risk assessment. But actually, the reality of the lived experience of people is different. I think that's maybe where I'm hoping the code might end up going, is that you've got individuals and organisations working on a project and saying, well, this company's signed up to the code and they're not adhering to it because this is what I'm experiencing. And also we want to create loads of whistleblowers and things like that. But I imagine there's going to be lots of people that will become familiar with it and have lots of challenges. And if things aren't going how they intend to, then where do they take that information? Who do they report that back to say, right, you're not following this? It might be a lot of finger pointing that starts happening in not too distant future.
So if I'm hearing you right, you've got somebody from Dave and Son going on site onto a tier 1 site, and they're harassed, or they see something that's not right, or they're asked to do something which they can't do because they don't have the right tools. It's something that creates a little bit of stress for them, and they think, no, this isn't right. That tier 1 has to have a way of that subcontractor reporting that, just like they have to do with occupational health. Am I right in saying that?
Most of them would have mechanisms for it, to report it.
So this is where 45,001 is going. You have to be able to have a mechanism to report it, because that person, even if he's from Dave and Sons, he's on a tier 1 site, that person needs to know, has to have a safety briefing, needs to understand what psychosocial risk is, needs to know how to report it. That's going to become baseline. The big issue, I think, is coming back to one of the 5 clusters, is we don't like talking about it. We don't want to talk about it. And this is where 45,003 and the code of practice, I think, is going to come into its own. We have to consult with the workforce. We can't fudge it by saying, here's a document. Right, and the code of practice is calling that out. We can have a document and it'll be sitting in a drawer or whatever it may be. You've got to evidence what you are doing. You need to go and talk to your workforce. You need to go and talk to your subbies, your subcontractors, and you need to have those open and honest conversations. If we're causing you an issue that makes you stressed to a point where it's not good for your health, we have to do something about that.
It's interesting. What do you think most organisations are going to be doing as the first point of call is over the next few, so maybe our thoughts around what you should be doing if you're listening to this and thinking, right, I'm now familiar with the JCOP. What should I do next? I'm guessing get in touch with us is one option.
Yes, clearly. And the first advice I'm going to give any client is, when was the last, well, it's not advice, it's a question, which I know the answer to probably. When is the last time you did a stress risk assessment? You do risk assessments every day, every week, every month, every year. you've got to start looking at what a psychosocial hazard is. In plain English, it's a stressor. It causes stress. Stress is the outcome. So you've got to look at the root cause, which is a stressor. When was the last time you assessed even 10% of your staff as to what's causing them stress within their work and on site and in their relationships on site? Do you know? What are you trying to tackle? So we've got this, Jacob. We've got 45,001, 45,003. But what's that mean to, Daves and Sons? You need to understand what might be causing some issues from a mental health point of view in work, not outside of work, in work, how that is a risk to your organisation and a risk to them. Therefore, where's your consultation piece? It can be a stress risk assessment. It can be a sit down and chat, which needs to be evidenced. It needs to be recorded somewhere. And if anything is identified through that mechanism, what are your monitoring, controls and measures? Yeah. We've been doing this for 20, 30 years for physical health, right?
Yeah.
And occupational health. So I would be advising a client or anyone who's in the trade to be thinking about that. And if they're difficult conversations to be having, then understandably, because we're not used to them, and there's maybe a feeling of, we don't talk about those sort of things, mental health, well, it's woke or whatever it might be, then so be it. But we are now sort of moving into a world where this is becoming the norm. We are talking about it more openly. Certainly the younger generation is, and therefore what's the future for this industry? So that would be my sort of initial go-to. What is it you're trying to solve? If you don't know, you need to go and find out. So how can we help you find out? There are already various ways of carrying out an assessment to get you quantitative data. Then you've got to sort of take a deeper dive. What's that telling you? Let's look at the qualitative data. Let's talk to people. Let's really find out what's happening. Hence why we're set up to have those conversations, educate, go in and do a gap analysis. When we do our gap analysis, we interview, very high level sort of easy breezy, open question interviews of, selection of the workforce to really find out, how they feel. It's not a gotcha. It's not yes, right or wrong. It's just how they feel, and therefore how can we start to move you in the right direction with regards to trying to make work good for us.
Yes, I think we've got lots we can say on this, because we've got experience of how this works well with in some ways, and how it can be a challenge. And I think we can save that for another episode. But let's. Oh, go on.
Can I just sorry to interrupt you there, but just on that point, before we move on, one of the questions we asked at our networking meeting last week was, do you feel your organisation has to do anything differently to adhere to the code? And I was surprised by the result, because 65% says there's a lot of us for us to do to reach a satisfactory level. 35% said some aspects, but not much to do. And nobody said we're reaching the level of the code. And I was surprised by that, albeit we had a snapshot of the industry. It wasn't everyone, but I was expecting something along those lines, because we know it. But to me, that just showed the scale of the problem is bigger than what I actually thought. Yeah,
there's a lot of work that needs to happen. It'll be interesting to watch this space. And we asked the network meeting as well, like what more needs to happen, and what can we do to help facilitate some further action. I think everyone's calling out for case studies and examples, and people kind of putting their hand up and saying, look, we might have done this, it might have worked well, might not have worked well, but really trying to come together now and share. And I think that's one of the things we've spoke about, is what part can we play in really trying to use the podcast, use whatever forums we can, because we need to all learn. No one's got the answer, and it's got to be shared wide and far, because if someone finds something that's making things better, then that absolutely needs to be shared with others.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think how do I put this in a diplomatic way, Jenny? Well, I think we're coming through the other side of what we saw after COVID, which was a lot of people getting involved in the workplace wellbeing space. I'm not just talking about construction here, but a lot of people getting involved trying to make a bit of money off the illness of others and what have you. Lots of apps, lots of tech, lots of you got to do this and what have you. Some of it is now, is not surviving. And what we're seeing here is probably those who are in it for the long term and understand the mechanisms and mechanics and have got themselves the education and got the experience, a bit like you and me, really coming together. We can't do this by ourselves. So there's no point in working in silos. There's no point in saying we're the first people to do X, Y, and Z, because waving your flags to say what you've done is virtue signaling. Show us how you're helping. And this is where I do think that Jacob is really saying here, the onus is on the industry to get this right. Right. And therefore we need to do it together. And I've heard myself saying on a couple of networking events and a couple of sessions I've been to is there's a lot of guidance in the Jacob and a lot of guidance in 45,003 once you get through the jargon. But organisations do need to work out how to do it for their organisation. And it's their data. It's not the industry data. It's your data, and this is what you're going to work with. So work it out for yourself. You've got to think for yourself. Then this is the one thing I found was a little bit of a criticism I've heard, not personally, but from the Jacob, is that it doesn't tell you how to do it. They can't tell you how to run your business. They're giving you a framework and guidance and guidelines. And this is down to, so we can look at case studies, which is great, but that's worked for an organisation with maybe a certain size, a certain environment, a certain industry and a certain culture and a certain CEO who, may have an emotional reason to be doing something versus a commercial reason. So case studies are good to a point, but we've got to look at what works for that individual. And I think for those who want to geek out, there's a podcast called Psych Health and Safety Podcast. It's generally run by a couple of people in Australia. They had a guy called Rob Rinder on it, who's Rob Rinder, should I say, not Rob Rinder, who's a university professor, and he talks about evidence-based. And he was on there a couple of months ago now, and he's talking about what do tech bros do? What do they wear? What do they drink? What time do they get up? If you followed that lifestyle, would you become famous? Would you become rich? No, you wouldn't. Just because you're doing what they're doing. It's basically sort of saying, look at evidence-based theories and frameworks which will work, but you need to practice them with regards to your evidence and data to make it work. So that's how we can help the organisations, is we can bring our knowledge of what we see other people are doing. We can bring our community, which is what we're trying to set up. This worked well over here. Okay, I can take a bit of that and probably bring it into what's over here, but used well researched and well moderated and robust data. Hence why I would always suggest somebody, when it comes to stress risk assessment, will look at the HSC or WEMWEB's in terms of a scale, in terms of measuring, because they've been put through the ringer and consistently demonstrate they give you, accurate enough results for you to be able to act upon. They're not just an app someone has set up 3 or 4 years ago and is trying to sell it to you based on their own evidence and research, and they've got 2 million data points or whatever it may be. We're talking something that is rigorous for the last 20 years and is demonstrated its worth.
Yes. Well, lots more we could say, and I'm just conscious we always could talk for more than we should do. So I suppose next steps for us, I know that we are looking at our next network events for the last quarter of the year, because at the moment we are getting into summer holidays, and yes, so the next one's going to be in September, and part of that we're going to use perhaps some case studies or examples from organisations, and use what they're doing at the moment. We have got Tideway lined up, obviously, where I spent quite a bit of my career, and I know that we've obviously had the podcast before where we had lots of positive conversations about the culture that they had there, so I'm interested to get that that live discussion in front of the network, so people can ask those questions about what did they actually do differently and what the things that they want to know. So that should be coming up in September, and no doubt it's going to be a big part of our kind of plans over the next 6 months. Yeah.
What that demonstrates, Jenny, is that you can be done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm all for it. It doesn't have to be the way it's always been done. And I think we do. We the world we live in and the world of work is changing more rapidly than it ever has done. And we're now seeing, pandemic showed us, just because we always did it that way doesn't mean to say it's the best way forward. And what Tideway and one or two other clients are showing is there is a different way, and your memory of working on that project will stay with you as a happy memory. Okay, and you'll always use it as a benchmark. And they probably got the best from. Don't take this the wrong way. I know you're working with me and it's your own company, but they've probably got a very high level of productivity from you. It's not rocket science. It's not difficult. It's just the old ways. Don't work as well as they used to. And in fact, did they ever work in the first place? Because now look at where we are, 20, 15 years on. Generation Z will not tolerate what you and I went into the workforce will not tolerate when you and I went into the workforce. They are looking for purposeful work and be treated fairly and respectfully and with dignity. And ultimately, this is what I see this being. We've got to stop harming people from a mental health point of view in the workplace, because you won't have a future and you won't have an organisation if we don't do it. So Tideway and demonstrating clients that get it right are showing there is another way and it can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's leave it on that note, and more to come on that, absolutely. So thanks everyone for joining us. I think if anyone's got any thoughts about topics that Stuart and I should bring to the podcast, or people that you think have got some really good stories to share with us, then please do get in touch. Thanks again to GKR Scaffolding for sponsoring our show, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. See you next time.